for Presbyterians for Earth Care. We're hosting this morning's online workshop, and we're going to be talking today about the overture, the Climate Overture. So I would like to go ahead and introduce for you this morning our speaker. I'm going to switch over here to his bio. Today we'll be hearing from Fred Milligan. I'll tell you a little bit about Fred. He grew up on a farm in north central Arkansas between the Strawberry and White Rivers in the ancestral lands of the Osage and Quapaw people, known to the French by the Illini named Arkansas, or people of the South Winds, from which the name Arkansas derives. He was nurtured in his faith and ordained into the Cumberland Presbyterian denomination after his master's in divinity studies at Vanderbilt University Divinity School. He joined the PCUSA after its founding in 1983 when he moved to Chicago to study theological ethics at the University of Chicago. Across the years, he's maintained an interest in ministry at the intersection of geography or place with technology, race, and poverty. While serving in the position of Associate for Stewardship for the denomination in 2005 to 2007 and afterwards, he assisted with the startup and development of the Eco Stewards program for helping young adults understand the theological and ethical underpinnings of our call to care for creation. Afterwards, he joined the Presbyterians for Earth Care Steering Committee, where he served until he moved to Chile to serve there as a pastor of an English language expat congregation. In November of 2021, Fred was asked to represent the Presbyterians for Earth Care as the head of our delegation to the COP26, in part due to the fact that he is currently living in Glasgow, Scotland, and participating in an 8-month-long familiarization program to learn about the Church of Scotland there. During our online debriefing of their experiences there, he volunteered to draft and edit an overture to the General Assembly as a way to spur more discussion and action among our membership around these important issues addressed in the conversation of partners to the United Nations Climate Change Accords and Paris Climate Accords. Fred plans to continue to remain engaged in this global movement in the coming years and to contribute in any way possible to the protection of our planetary ecosystem and the well-being of all life for its own sake and the sake of future generations of humanity. So without further, unless I've forgotten anything, I'd like to introduce to you Fred Milligan.
Hello, I am so happy to be a part of this effort. I know we also want to introduce Burkhard Petzold as well. He was another of our delegates. Burkhard is a retired PCUSA mission worker. He was our liaison to the European churches and is from Germany. And it's good to see you here, Burkhard. And Burkhard was a part of our delegation there in Glasgow at the COP26 in November for those 2 weeks. So I didn't know if you were going to be able to show that little video or not, Mindy.
Yes, I can do that now. Would you like me to go ahead and run that now?
Why don't you share the screen and show that to everybody? This gives you a little overview of what we experienced in those 2 weeks.
Mindy, I think you need to share audio when you share your screen because we're not hearing any audio.
Mindy, if you will let me share my screen, I can show it with the sound.
Fred, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, we can't see you.
Oh, sorry about that. So if you would give me screen sharing, I can try to show it on from my computer and share the sound.
Okay, you have it.
Okay.
I don't know why there was no sound. I could hear it, so sorry.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. There's a thing you have to do to show that to share that sound. And since I'm not set up for it, I don't want to take up any more of our time.
Okay, I'll figure it
Makes
out for the end.
Oh, that would be great. That would be
Okay.
great. If you could do that, that would be
Yep.
terrific. Okay. So if can you share the screen and
Yes.
throw and put up the overture then? The plan this morning is for me to kind of walk through the different recommendations, assuming that if you're, if you want to, you can go down and read the rationale. But I think everybody who cares enough to be on this webinar already is convinced. And that's what the rationale is about, right? To convince people that we need to do what the recommendations say are calling us to do. So let's just focus on the recommendations to begin with. And I'm going to go through each one of the 9 recommendations. And afterwards, I'm going to ask, are there any questions for clarification? And then we'll clarify things that need to be clarified. And then after we get through the 9 recommendations, then then we can just have a general discussion for a few minutes. So let's start with this first one. Repent of our participation and growing complicity in the processes which have brought our planetary ecosystem to the tipping point of unsustainability for humans and mass extinction of other species. Is there anything that needs to be clarified about that recommendation? Are there any questions around that? Mindy, maybe you can put the people on, maybe you can help watch for hands that are
Yep, or
lifted.
people can unmute themselves if they want to, or would you like me to watch for their hands?
Yeah, why don't you watch for hands up,
Okay.
and that way we don't talk over each other.
Does everybody know how to raise your hand? I'm going to say probably yes.
into our third year of Zoom meetings and COVID pandemic, I think people are pretty Zoom savvy by now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Check
nothing
the
to be
chat.
clarified on that. We all know we need to repent, right? But one of the things, I'll just say another word about this. One of the things it seemed to me was important about starting with repentance is that we don't want to come across as speaking as though we are, morally righteous and the rest of the world are a bunch of sinners. We recognize that we are all a part of the problem, as well as part of the solution. So we need to approach what we're doing with some humility, and beginning with repentance, I think, is the right place for us to start as Christians. And the second recommendation is direct that all PCUSA financial investments be withdrawn from industries that contribute to the production of the two major greenhouse gases, that's CO2 and methane, accelerating the timeline of the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment, guided by the Carbon Underground 200 and those listed in the Global Industry Classification Standard, and by those numbers, and effectively end our investment in the production and use of plastics. The reason we wanted to put this in, even though we do have this process that I know when I've read the other overtures and I see responses to them over the years and most recently around divestment, you get pushback from people who say, well, we have this process to engage with these industries and so forth and discern which ones need to be divested from and when and so forth. And I appreciate that. And I think that the time for that has come and gone. I think it's time now to join all the other groups, Christian groups around the world, and the other not-for-profit organizations, NGOs around the world, who combined at this point have already divested of around $39 trillion from investments related to research and development of fossil fuels. We are really at a crunch point, and we really need to do this now, and we need to continue pressing forward on this point. That this is not anything that we need to dither about any longer. Are there other questions about this particular recommendation?
Also, if you're more comfortable typing your question into the chat, we'd be glad to read it out loud for you.
Great. Questions for clarification. We'll get into discussion and debate or whatever later. Okay. Number 3, direct the Board of Pensions. Wait, why isn't there a time frame for divestment? Okay, so yeah, well, the time frame often happens. We could talk about that a little bit more later, but the reason we didn't put the time frame in here is because there are issues with investment portfolios that sometimes involve taking a number of years to actually withdraw without severe penalties on the money that you have invested, that is kind of interwoven between fossil fuel investments and maybe some other kinds of investments. So that's the reason we didn't put a time frame there, but we're saying direct that they do it, and rather than basically the status quo that we have now is that they just engage and year by year come back with different recommendations. So basically what we're recommending is that we just make the decision to divest and then trust our institutions then to do that. Now, certainly as different presbyteries work with this overture, you are certainly welcome to make modifications. And if your presbytery feels that you want to strengthen this and make it a more specific time frame, and put that into that recommendation for your presbytery, fine. When the way this works is once the different presbyteries have concurred with the general overture, even there can still be some modification from presbytery to presbytery. And then when they all come back at the end of the day to the General Assembly, once it's referred to committee there for their work, when it comes before the body of the General Assembly, then some of those things can get hashed out a little bit more. Was there a second question, Mindy?
Actually, we have a couple more questions. Roger would like to know if divesting from plastics means all food packaging and food production.
Yeah. Well, what we're talking about doing is divesting from industries that contribute to CO2 and methane. And of course, there have to be judgment calls along the way around those kinds of things about which industries get divested and so forth. And that's not something that we are mandating or that we're calling for a mandate for. All the complete divestment of any plastics from any plastic production. However, what we have become aware of is that plastics are not only a pollutant within the environment and cause great damage in many, many ways that I'm sure we're all aware of, but we're becoming more aware of that they are themselves an accelerant to climate change. The extent to which they use fossil fuels in their production in particular, they are an accelerant to climate change. So by drawing down on and pulling back from production of fossil fuels, then we will be pulling back on the production of and undercutting the production of plastics. And okay, so that hopefully clarifies that. When we can discuss the pros and cons of it a little bit more later. Okay, so right now we're just, this is our overture, so we're not going to be changing this overture, but some individual presbyteries may choose to add their, modify in their presbytery. So any more questions for clarification on this item?
Another one from Sue is, who is being directed? Does methane also include beef industry? Was a second question she has.
Well, I think that's a very good question, Sue. And I think when we are asking our agencies to make those, discerning decisions, then they will, if they are looking for places where methane is produced, the meat industry is one of the big ones, right? So that could be open for further conversation down the road. We didn't want to get that specific in this one, but I understand that does open the door for consideration of other forms of methane or sources of methane. So are we ready to go to number 3?
Well, one quick comment that I think might be a good one to mention is from Jim, is that our divestment won't stop production of plastics. It is to discourage production by affecting the costs.
Say that again, Mindy.
Our divestment won't stop production of plastics. It is to discourage production by affecting the cost.
I don't hear a question there, but
okay.
Okay, so let's go to number 3. Direct the Board of Pensions and the Presbyterian Church USA Foundation to increase investment in low carbon emission renewable energy, energy efficiency, and energy storage in ways that complement policies to transition workers in our present fossil fuel industry into green and sustainable energy sector employment. So I think this was this concern appears in one of the other overtures that's coming on divestment. And I think it's a really important one to be aware that as we shift, we need to take care of as best we can those who are working in the industry and find ways to invest in renewable energy. As we're pulling money out of fossil fuels, we need to be investing in renewables. Are there questions or around clarification on this one? Okay. Number 4, encourage all PCUSA members and congregations to study the various documents produced by the General Assembly over the past 30 years, including the most recent 2022 Advisory Committee on Social Witness Policy in document, Investing in a Green Future, a Vision for a Renewed Creation, Scripture, and other related overtures, such as these overtures, which are in the process of coming through the presbyteries to this General Assembly in June. These are all excellent, by the way. We really want to support them and really feel that this overture that we're offering is one that supports these other overtures and does not contradict them or conflict with them, or the document from the Committee on Social Witness Policy. We just feel that this was just another way to, help promote conversation around these issues, provide resources through the links that we provide, and so forth. Are there questions around clarification on this one? Okay.
I don't see any.
Number 5, urge our congregations and members to become the needed faithful change we seek by being carbon neutral, net zero, or even climate positive by 2030. Encourage congregations with historic or landmark buildings to retrofit their structures to the furthest extent possible. Implore all PCUSA related educational institutions, secondary schools, colleges, universities, and seminaries, and individual members to do the same with their homes and facilities. Questions for clarification on this one? Okay. Number 6, advocate through our Office of Public Witness in Washington, our UN and other denominational offices, for national and international accountability around financial obligations and commitments under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, including the pledges made to assist economically developing and emerging countries with carbon use mitigation and adaptation. So are there questions around this recommendation? Okay. Advocate through these same channels for climate justice based in national and international commitments to assist economically developing and emerging countries with recovery from the loss and damage resulting from the industrialized countries' disproportionate impact on climate change, such as also known as climate debt, as a new and proactive stewardship of the earth. Questions for clarification on this one? This was one of the huge issues at the COP26. I should just back up and say about the COP, and hopefully we can get that video shown again and with the music, but hopefully those photographs that you did get to see gave a sense of just what the size of the religious community's presence there. It was unlike anything most of the COP veterans had seen before. I know Burkhard had been at one other COP, and Bill Samplaski-Jarman was with us there, and he'd been at all the other COPs. And some of the people who were part of our U.S. delegation that we had the opportunities to speak with said they had not seen such a huge outpouring from the religious community and from the NGO community, from civil society, as another way to term it, surrounding the COP Just to give you an example of the size of of the number of people who came there that weren't on some sort of an expense account. Um, Local people in Scotland housed around 30,000 um, people in their homes. Around, who needed not 30,000 people were at the COP. They housed 12,000 people. That's what it was. Yeah, they housed 12,000 people in their homes in the Glasgow area, and there were around 30,000 people at the COP. So that gives you a sense of just the size of this whole uh, kind of beehive of activity. I don't want to steal Burkhardt's thunder, because that's a phrase that he uses that about the COP that he may want to say more about later. Okay, looking at number 8, advocate through all PCUSA channels the implementation of the carbon dividend overture from, I think that was from 2018. It was 08-12. Yeah, approved by commissioners in 2018, and encourage our government to pursue other economic strategies for incorporating externalized environmental costs into pricing of all goods and services. Now, I think that this is a brilliant overture that was passed in 2018. A lot more needs to be done with that. The particular paragraph around the carbon dividend, I think, is really key. It contrasts the carbon dividend approach to the cap and trade approach. Um, Both of those approaches are trying to, incorporate externalized environmental costs into pricing. But I think that this carbon dividend is the better approach as well, as does that overture. And I think that this is something that needs to happen, because right now so much of the costs is borne uh, by the most vulnerable in the world. And we say more about that in our rationale section that comes after these recommendations. Was there a question that popped up on that one, Mindy, in the chat?
There was just some discussion going back to number 7. I don't think there was a specific question,
Okay.
just some kind of background discussion between people.
Oh, well, hey,
Important discussion,
we want that discussion. Yeah, so we'll come back to all of that, those notes in the chat in a moment. So looking at number 9, direct the Presbyterian Office of the UN, Presbyterian Hunger Program staff, and our church's Office of Public Witness in Washington to develop a 10-year strategy of accompaniment and advocacy before, during, and after the annual Conference of Partners, the COP program, and the UNFCCC, utilizing, to the extent practicable, our deployed staff and colleagues at World Communion of Reformed Churches and World Council of Churches and so forth. Work cooperatively with former staff and volunteers to extent possible to provide continuity across the years, and in collaboration with voluntary organizations such as ours, Presbyterians for Earth Care, to provide updates and make recommendations consistent with our social witness policy. We felt like this needed to be in here because when in the run-up to this last COP, there seemed to be not a strong sense of initiative on the part of our mission agency to make sure that we had some people representing us as Presbyterians at that COP. Now, there were very good reasons why our national staff did not go, having to do with the injustices and inequities around the distribution of COVID vaccines in the world, in poorer countries, as well as the actual carbon costs of transporting people to that COP and so forth. And I understand that reasoning, but I do think that it is important for us to stay plugged into these processes and to be a part of and contribute to this voice of the religious community gathered around these annual conversations. Because right now we are told by the scientists, and our urgency around this comes from the science on this that is detailed in the rationale section. The scientists are telling us that this is, you don't, all of you understand this, the urgency of this. This has to be done. 10 years, they were saying 10 years 2 years ago. So now we're looking at 8 years, really. So it really, everything that we hear, that when they say 10 years, we need to just subtract 2 years off of that. It really has to be done, and we really need to stay on the case and continue coordinating some kind of a voice and representation for feedback into this process of these annual COP meetings. So now let's get other comments, other thoughts for just a few minutes, and before we move on to what's next on our agenda. What were some of the things that came up, Mindy, in the
Okay, so yeah, we have some discussion. Well, one person I was just replying to, we do have an asterisk with more detail in one of our points that you've gone over, and I was just mentioning that you definitely have access to this entire document. You can download it from the homepage of our website, or I can put probably the PDF in the chat. So if you want to see more detail about the footnotes, we can definitely get that to you. Okay, so we have some comments in here about, I'm sorry, there's a lot. All right, let me see here. Let's see here. Okay, let me see who this was from. Okay, Karen said that in our attempt to reduce CO2 and greenhouse gases, we turn to only those alternatives whose waste production also benefits the Earth biome, not nuclear with its waste. We still have no idea what to do with.
I think that's certainly true, and that's why we don't mention nuclear here, and as something that we would recommend. I think that one of the other big question marks has to do with biomass, the use of biomass, and cutting down old growth forests and simply replacing it with new trees that are part of the biomass production process is a real detriment in many ways. Not the least of which is the extent to which in the Amazon, for instance, whole communities of people are uprooted and destroyed when you take out these old growth forests and all of the issues around biodiversity that is involved with that as well. So I think that there's lots of questions around not only nuclear as an alternative, but also the use of biomass as an alternative.
And we have Bill Bray with his hand up. Bill, if you want to unmute, go ahead.
You have many hot links in this wonderful overture, and somebody in the chat asked for more details on overture 0812 of paragraph 8. And I've put a hot link to that overture in the chat. Maybe that could be a hot link in the overture itself, so people can follow that.
Yeah, I don't know what's possible at this point now that it's been distributed, but we can always add that on our website, on the one that appears on our website for download. Yeah, I thought that myself as I was going back through this, preparing for this conversation today. I thought, oh, that's too bad we didn't have a hot link on that one. You can go to PC Biz and you can find that overture there. But thank you, Bill, for putting that hot link for us. Were there other comments or questions or?
I'm looking. We do have other comments and questions. Let's see.
Roger had the
Go ahead, Bruce.
Roger had a question. Why does population stabilization not appear anywhere? Realizing this is a most difficult topic, of course. That is an important topic. I would also remind you that North American USA citizens use far more energy than most of the population of the world. So we may look at India and China and places where the population is growing and considerably larger, but if we point fingers, we got to point at ourselves. If we can get our own act together here in the United States, that will make a huge difference because of our level of energy use per capita compared to the other parts of the world. We do need to support population stabilization, and one of the ways we can do that is educating and empowering women. A number of people have seen that as very important, but I would respectfully say we need to be looking at what we need to correct here in the United States.
I would also say, to the extent that I had a hand in this, it wasn't in the original draft, and we had incredible feedback, and many of you may have been a part of that, providing very detailed and very careful and thoughtful, prayerfully considered feedback on this original draft that we distributed. And that really did strengthen our overture to bring it to the place it is today, which I think is in a pretty good place. And not a single comment was made in any of the feedback we got about that issue.
We sent it out to our entire email list, which I think was about 1,500 people.
Yeah.
So we weren't shy in asking for people's input.
And I distributed it to a number of other people in the ecumenical community, the ACT Alliance, World Council of Churches community, and so good point. Good points, Bruce. Are there other thoughts or questions about this?
I think we should listen to Burkhard. Maybe he will inspire some.
Yes, let's get Burkhard in here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this. I'm kind of divided because Presbyterian Church is my church and it's not my church because I'm German. So there's no Presbyterian Church in Germany, but there's a Protestant church in Germany, and I feel close. And I feel close to Presbyterian Church because I was, as mentioned, a regional liaison for Presbyterian World Mission. So thank you very much for inviting me. And it's good to see some familiar names. I don't see all the faces. I have a small computer, but I see some names that I'm aware of. Thank you for joining. My background is that in Germany, there is a process called Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation. It's an ecumenical process. It's not only in Germany, but it was important for us in East Germany when the transformation came, and to be part of that transformation process in the churches. It was important for us to see this complexity of changes that is necessary. And I feel that I am in a situation now, and I feel that you also are in a situation now where this complexity is important. And being at COP26 in Glasgow together with Fred and others, you could smell the complexity, and you could smell the different interests and the different positions of the nations involved, and all these topics that you have mentioned, like also about population stabilization, might have come up with all the different interest groups. We felt strongly related to the faith community, and for us it was important to see not only the ecological and climate change issues, but also the social issues and the issues of global justice. So I think it was good to see the momentum that many nations really understood that there needs to be a process of change. And at the same time, we had all these different interests. And so transformation needs resources. And for some, these resources are limited. Not for all, but for some, they are limited. Individually and socially, there are winners and losers of that transformation. And of course, there are powerful forces of persistence. That was also very obvious. Many now talk in Europe, and I think also in the US, talk about a Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal as a transformation model supported by and carried out mainly by us in the industrialized countries as a model, also give a new boost to economy. That's good, definitely. But it did not change per se the injustice in international relations, in international trade, which means there are losses from transformation for some of the players, and there are socializing losses and privatizing profits still, like the old model was in fossil industries. So I have used the term green colonialism when I think of situations where we change our economy, where we change our way of the technology works, but still we exploit countries that have, for instance, lithium as a product for battery production and others. So I feel strongly that we need to look at this complexity and to see these both sides of the coin, to really include developing countries, to include particular women, and to include indigenous communities, not only because they are the least protected and the most affected by climate disasters already, but to also to include them in the economical benefits of transformation, and not to exploit them again. Two examples, as I said, the lithium. Just a second. The lithium production in Bolivia and Chile, or renewable energy plants like windmills in sacred land of indigenous communities, because they are the least to protect against it, and the weakest, and cannot have not a strong lobby to not have that on their own land. So we need to really put these complexities into consideration, and it's important for us to really stick with justice, peace, and the integrity of creation that churches and faith communities have strongly lobbied for. And I can only echo what Fred has said about the faith community, that really was a lobby for those who are the weakest in this global process of transformation. And that's why I felt strongly to say a few words about that. Thank you for letting me share that.
I see a question. Can we talk about, what was the question? Can we put something in the overture about population reduction of Americans? At this point, we've closed our work and editing process for our overture, and I think if other if individual presbyteries choose to put certain things in that they would like to go in, they can certainly do that. But at this point, we've closed our editing process for the overture.
Fred?
Bruce, yeah.
Yeah, I was just, from a strategy perspective, we have emphasized what you just said. Individual presbyteries can tweak this. They can make it their own. If, as one of my friends said, some of the language in West Virginia wouldn't fly, they might consider taking that paragraph out when they act on it and sending it to General Assembly. So different presbyteries can tweak it. We'll need to check to see how many concurring presbyteries need to have the identical language. But I know just a few years ago, we had multiple presbyteries taking slightly different language. I would personally say we have two people here from Europe. The Europeans' energy use, I think, is about half what the Americans is. So it's not only an issue of population, but it's also an issue of what that population does. You can have a high standard of living without being nearly as wasteful as Americans are. So, it's not just, okay, everybody stop having kids or have fewer kids. It's also, how do we make sure people conserve? My church is in the process of going to an energy company that only provides electrical energy through hydro and through wind. So we don't need necessarily to put solar panels on our roof like I did in a previous church, but all of our churches, all of our individual homes need to find that alternative, I think. Sue Smith, who is a primary author of the Investing in a Green Future, the excellent ASWAP report, and a longtime advocate for creation care, I believe a former vice moderator for Presbyterians for EC, has put a very helpful comment. Sue is also the stated clerk for, I think it's Highlands Presbyterian Church, one of the new presbyteries in New Jersey. So she does know the Book of Order quite well. And her comment is, if individual presbytery changes any of the rationale, it will need its own concurrence. So my friends, we want you to communicate with us. If you are proposing something that gets approved by your presbytery, we are more than happy to share that with other presbytery connections throughout our denomination so that we can seek to have concurrences. Our goal here with this overture is first and foremost to have conversations at the presbytery level. That the more we can get people talking about it, the more that can move people to action. The General Assembly is helpful and important, but quite frankly, they do a lot of wonderful things that the people in the pews and the people in the presbytery level never hear about. By doing this overture, we're hoping to create the conversation to talk more about creation care and then continue that into actions at the presbytery and congregational level as well as the national level.
We had somebody with their hand up, Bruce.
Okay, please speak.
I had my hand up, but Bruce addressed the issue that I had completely because it seems like there are a number of presbyteries across the country who might be interested in supporting this overture without the paragraph 2 on divestment. So if PEC is going to help get those presbyteries coordinated to get concurrences, that'd be wonderful.
Bill, I would respectfully encourage presbyteries maybe to tweak that second paragraph. For the first time in decades, Mrti, you may have seen the news report, is encouraging divestment from 5 major fossil fuel industries. And I think minimally, it would be good for presbyteries to say, we support the present Mrti recommendations. It doesn't have to go as far as number 2 does here, but let's show growing support for divestment. So, that could be a good compromise, don't you think, Bill?
Yes, no, agreed.
Okay. Other questions and comments, friends? I apologize for not being with you at the beginning. I was at my own Presbyterian meeting where they were going to be talking about this overture, and so I was tied in there. But I am very grateful for the excellent leadership that has been provided for you from the beginning, and you can, I hope, tell a number of people have been working on this. Some of us are less knowledgeable about the overture process than others. Would you give a brief explainer? Sure. And maybe Sue Smith can remind me of the May deadline for overtures that have no financial implications. There is actually a resource on the PCUSA website on how to submit an overture. It's a document you can download. Basically, you need to look at your presbytery bylaws for how an overture is brought to your presbytery for consideration to then be sent on to the General Assembly. Some presbyteries require a church session or two to sponsor the overture. Some presbyteries allow the teaching elders, the ministers of word and sacrament, who are members of the presbytery, a couple of them to sponsor it. Each presbytery has its own guidelines for how an overture is brought to the presbytery. And then once it's on the docket, then it's an opportunity for discussion, which is really what we're hoping will happen, that people will struggle with these issues and talk about the issues. And then if it does get approved, it gets sent to the General Assembly. An assembly committee will be looking at all of the overtures dealing with the care of God's creation, ones coming from the presbyteries, as well as ones coming from agencies such as ASWAP is presenting, as I mentioned, the Investing in a Green Future document. The ones that we're aware of to date, you will see listed in this overture. There could very well be some others. All of them, once they have been approved by a presbytery, can be found on BizLink, which is a link from the Office of the General Assembly of our denomination, and that will show you all of the different overtures that are out there. What we are hoping at Presbyterians for Earth Care is you will keep us in the loop as far as your efforts in your presbytery, because we may be aware of other people in your presbytery that would be very supportive of it, or maybe trying to do it on their own as well, and we want to get things coordinated. And again, if you tweak the language, let us know, and we will publicize that so other presbyteries can consider it. Burkhard had his hand raised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say a few words about number 2 again. I know that this is a hot topic. I've been to Portland, Oregon, to the Synod, to the General Assembly there, and it was a hot issue to talk about divestment. I really encourage you to look into that and maybe tweak it, but not delete it. It's so important, and please look at other churches, what they are doing in this regard. I can see that some of you might be a bit confused about the last part of the sentence talking about plastics. I wasn't too overly happy that this is part of that, because it gives you a completely different perspective that is also important, but it's kind of separate. Please look into the divestment issues, tweak it, but don't delete it. I urge you to not delete it.
I would, my two friends in Europe, you could remind us, I believe, that the Presbyterian Church of Ireland and the Church of Scotland have both divested at this point. Is that correct, of fossil fuels?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
So the so-called mother churches of American Presbyterianism are ahead of us, so we should follow their example. So, but again, a compromise minimally could be supporting MRTI in divesting from the 5 major companies. If you can get that through, but nothing else, that would be a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
The Lordship of Jesus Christ involves all of life, including our investments. Other questions and comments? Mindy, I think maybe you can take it off the screen so we can see like a gallery view of people.
Also, Bruce, we're going to run the video again when we're ready. You weren't here, but the first time through, I did not have the sound on. So when we're done,
Okay,
I'm going to put my screen back up.
take the overture off for now so people have a larger view of the people present here. Thank you. I believe it's about a 2-minute video, so why don't we do that after we're done the recording. Our goal, folks, is to finish this in about a couple of minutes, the recording of it, so that we will then put that on YouTube as a resource for people. Presbyterians for Earth Care is developing a speakers group. So if you are bringing this to your session or to your presbytery and want a speaker to Zoom in, we will try to make those people available to work in your time frame. This video will be another resource. Fred and I talked about a bibliography of online resources for each of the 9 action items, and we'll try to get that together for you fairly soon as well. There's not a dearth or a lack of reading materials or videos out there, but we can hopefully screen what we think is most helpful for you. Are there, I'm looking down at the chat, questions or comments? Wyoming is a big fossil fuel state. Politicians strive to protect that. We understand that. I think Wyoming also has, if I remember correctly, felt the impact of climate change. If people want to connect the dots, and we need to think not only of ourselves, but the boss says, love our neighbors. And our neighbors, as you remember from the parable of the Good Samaritan, is not limited to the people across the street or sharing property lines, but literally the outsider, the foreigner. They are all people we are called to show compassion to. Other questions and comments?
Bruce, could you share, or could someone share in the chat a link to the latest MRTI report that you referenced?
It's in the, it is, I just shared in the chat the resource on how to submit an overture. So you have the official General Assembly guideline for that. It's a downloadable file. Let me see if I can do the Presbyterian News Service. I think Mike Ferguson is part of our chat, and he is the coordinator for PNS, and maybe Mike could put it in the chat for everyone. He's probably quicker at finding it than I am, but I think it's a couple weeks old now, if I remember correctly. But I did have a good chat with the staff person for MRTI, and we are tentatively planning a program with him in May before the General Assembly, so that we would have an hour-long program for people to ask about divestment issues. And I'm hoping Abby from Fossil Free Peace USA will be part of that as well. We're going to hopefully be able to provide some webinars for your commissioners to make sure people are as fully informed, because we will not have access like we have had past General Assemblies. With the hybrid model, it's unfortunately pretty restrictive, as well as limiting access when people are in Louisville. Thank you, Bill, for putting in the MRTI news story from Presbyterian News Service. You'll see the link in the chat for that, folks. Other questions or comments? How about, maybe some people have some questions they just don't necessarily want to be recorded asking. So unless there's anything people think needs to be included in the recording, we can stop. And maybe, Mindy, give everybody, since most folks have been going for an hour, why don't we have a little break and people can enjoy the 2-minute video. And if they feel like they saw it well enough, they can go get a drink or something and then come back. But we will continue this informally for everyone with any questions or comments they might have.